So the housing policy in Senegal is more geared towards trying to bridge the gap between the people that actually have houses and those that do not. The estimated number of the deficit is about 350 homes, and that has been kind of put out as a number. There's some prescription of what the quality of housing needs to be in terms of sizes. So what constitutes social housing in terms of affordability, in terms of minimum standard houses. But I think the thinking doesn't go far enough in order to consider urban questions, like where this housing needs to be, for instance. Many of the sort of new housing that is being built is outside of the city. People have to sign up for it. I don't think it's mostly geared towards young people. It will be mostly geared towards people who have families, for instance, and to be able to own a place where they can raise their children. And unfortunately, it tends to be outside of the city. In new cities, in places that have very little services, some of the parcels don't even have enough all the sort of, let's say, rainwater sanitation that is needed. We've seen new cities be flooded already when the rain happens. So what is really lacking is a bigger conversation about the quality of housing, access to services, and also really build neighborhoods at the end of the day, right? Because to live is much more than to have a roof over your head. And so Senegal has become a new producer of oil and then gas as well to come. And it kind of brought a lot of, I guess, celebration because of this autonomy or potential money that the country can make. But I think it begs the question of what we want to do about fossil fuel as a whole, because we have to think again about the model of our cities, and when it comes to mobilities, whether we want to retain the dependency on the car, and even make cities that actually are planned on the car, because those are cities that are very far apart, that tends to be quite sprawled out, and who's going to be able to afford it, and the effect as well that it has on the pollution. A big issue we have in Senegal is that many of the cars, because we don't produce them, that are imported, are actually cars that are sometimes even forbidden in some of the EU because of how polluting that they are. Dakar at the beginning was really a city centered around the harbor, the port city, the railway as well, which was the sort of colonial economic model to be able to take things, out of the country, right? So that's, I think, why also many of the colonial cities were on the coast. Now I think there is more of a focus on public services is what the city sort of geared towards. But it's interesting thinking about the possibility to create industries and job within the cities, because they don't have to be necessarily the big factories, but there are various microeconomies, and sometimes some of the mines that exist within the city. In Dakar, for instance, whenever you demolish a building, many of the parts are kind of dismantled and go towards a market of people that reuse it, in terms of metal, but that's within the city. You have people reusing, for instance, taps in order to make jewelry. So when it comes to food culture in Senegal, we see the kind of growth of obviously the supermarkets, but the traditional, let's say, markets are still very present. The fishermen still go every day, at sea to get the fish, and these aren't big boats. People just going on their small fishing boats and coming back and selling them to the population. So we do see some persistence of this kind of traditional procurement of food when it comes to fish. And some of the produce that comes from the rural areas. Now, what has changed a lot is that I think some cultures of eating have been introduced probably during the colonial period that doesn't really make sense in our context. So for instance, the fact that we eat wheat when wheat doesn't grow in Senegal, and the baguette is really probably a source of national pride for some, is really problematic, because in the events that we've seen with the war, where there is a sort of glitch in the supply chain, international supply chain, then you have our presidents or leaders having to go and ask for like wheat, when we have so many other cereals that grow, like millet, like fonio, like sorghum, in some context, and that we actually could use. They're a lot more. They have a lot more nutrients, than the wheat that we have nowadays. They are endemic species, so they don't require water. They're very sustainable in many ways, and a lot of the rethinking has to be done on the models of our food and what is it that we eat. I think that digital world allows people to be very connected, to also have a certain presence online, which I think matters in many contexts when it comes to, let's say, protests and things like that. People can voice themselves on these like digital platforms. The risk, as I think many other countries are facing, is the fact that it can increasingly isolate, people from their immediate surrounding. And I guess the bigger conversation as well with the digital is how it can be, it's seen as something that is dematerialized, right? When it's actually fed by minerals, right? The data is stored in data centers, the internet comes through like cables. All of this thing does have a material impact. And particularly when it comes to smartphones, we know the ills that it causes in the Congo, for instance, in the mining of coltan and so many other minerals. I feel particularly, I think, as Africans, that we cannot divorce this kind of digital revolution from the sort of kind of socio-economic impact that it can have on our societies. Whether people speak about, about the nuclear energy, uranium, when uranium comes from Niger, or talking about electric cars when they are made out of like nickel and zinc and all of those things to feed the batteries. Do we want these models? When we have mines, what kind of cities does that generate? What kind of social dynamic does that generate, right? When you have places where you have either just men or just children working and people being exploited, is that really something that we want to support? So the question of migration is very I think of raises a lot of problems and a lot of problematics, and I often have a frustration about how it's being framed in the public discourse. For instance, earlier we spoke about the food supplies, and we spoke about fish and fishermen. There's been a rise in immigration in fishermen villages because the fishermen can no longer live from fishing. And they can no longer live from fishing because there are contracts that have been signed between the Senegalese government and some Spanish, for instance, companies that have these fishing boats that do overfishing in the coast, and not being able to connect those two facts and kind of speaking about the fishermen, trying to seek a better life when their livelihoods have been taken away from them is really not fair, and is actually quite twisted. And there's this, again, discourse around, illegal migration, etc. No human is illegal, first and foremost. The idea that people are illegals, I think, has been constructed in order to fundamentally, I believe, create an underclass of people that can be exploited. I think illegal immigration is beneficial when you want to have people that are, because they're undocumented, you don't pay them any rates, you don't have to sort of house them, you don't have to treat them essentially as humans, and it kind of legitimizes a form of slavery at the end of the day, as it's been documented, I think, in many various industries, sometimes in the midst of construction, that people saw in Paris for the Olympics, that they were undocumented migrants that were, buildings. Here, I know that there's a big chunk of people coming from Senegal, West Africa, working, for instance, in agriculture, sometimes seasonally, but I think it's very clear that this sort of workforce is very needed in Europe, in addition to the fact that as Africans, we don't want to see, obviously, the draining of the continent sort of workforce to go elsewhere, because we want to build our countries as well. And I'm a lot more invested in trying to make opportunities there and trying to showcase that it's also possible to make it ourselves. As a young person, I studied in Europe, was able to go back to my country and create a company and really fight through my work, through my architecture, for the generation of opportunities, of local opportunities, using local materials, but also the local workforce is really important. So yes, my view on it is it's not really cynical. I see it very clearly, and I think it'll just be good to stop this form of like gaslighting, right? Political gaslighting that, you know, it's people are trying to come to Europe to seek benefits, or, you know, Europe is like so tired of having to like deal and welcome all these migrants when it's also responsible for creating the migration crisis, you know, however it is that you look at it. And there could be, I think, a world where people are able to travel and have very fair exchange, but it has to be from a place of equal footing and from the place of acknowledging everybody's like dignity in the same way as well. Because we get in Senegal a lot of migrations from Europe, you know, it tends to be sure older people, sometimes younger people too, looking for opportunities, you know, but they aren't, you know, treated or even coined the same way that people look at migrants from Africa here. But I know in architecture, some Senegalese economic migrants in Senegal, you know, from Spain, but they get good salaries, good opportunities. So yeah, I think we should look at human dignity as a whole and advocate for more fairness in the way people are treated. Yeah.